All right, so next we have Sophia Thimmes. Sophia Thimmes has taught youth theater, spoken and performed at the 2018 Secular Student Alliance Conference, co-led a high school seminar about spoken word poetry, and has hosted and won several poetry slams. She likes poetry because it's a socially acceptable form of talking about everything ever, even the weird stuff. Along with poetry, she likes forests, overpriced soy lattes, and getting overly excited about random marine biology and outer space facts. She is currently a student at Utah State University, where she works as an English tutor. Please welcome Sophia.
Hello there. So before I get into today's talk, I am going to do a poem that I wrote about strangers, because strangers are very fascinating creatures. People talk about strangers, how they're often dangerous. I'm fascinated by two strangers who are sitting on a bus, the moment their limbs accidentally brush. For a moment, two worlds will briefly collide, only to slide away separately. Lips fumbling with a muttered apology for two clumsily bumping knees. And forgive me, please, if I sometimes prefer the fleeting intimacy of strangers to the intricacy of friendship. There is something so cozy about the lack of expectation, obligation of the woman in the cool, oversized jacket as she hurtles through the subway station. Strangers are often the ones that we can trust with our most ugly and intimate sides. The cleaning companies we pay to scrape away our grime. The note-taking shrink with his scratching pen in whom we confide. The dentist with his wriggling latex fingers for whom we open wide from a steep, squeaking recline. And last night, I met a woman at a party who dropped out of med school to cut hair for a living, exchanged the cutting intimacy of surgery for another kind of personal sniffing. After she has massaged the scalps of her clients' secrets start slipping later, she will sweep away the tales of sordid affairs and embarrassments, along with hair follicle clippings. 1980s newspaper clippings showed the beginnings of a paranoid sort of Halloween folklore, a warning of what would happen if you let your children collect from strangers by going door to door, stories of children coming home late to find razor blades and cyanide in their Halloween candy. Yet strangely, the only incidences of these children actually falling to harm were because of the actions of their own family. For instance, Tommy, whose father killed him so he could collect on insurance money. But stranger danger, right? Except you're more likely to suffer abuse from someone you already know than some random person slinking through the streets at night. Stranger danger, but it feels so much safer to be a stranger, someone whose faults and vulnerabilities are still unknown. Stranger danger, but it feels so much safer to interact with someone who can never really abandon you or leave you alone. Stranger danger, but there's something so cozy about the lack of expectation, obligation as you wrap your cool oversized jacket around you and hurtle through the subway station. Thanks. So, hello, my name is Sophia, and I am a total spoken word poetry geek and advocate. I really like spoken word poetry because it helps me find a voice, to feel empowered, to be heard, and to connect me to a community. I grew up in a pretty religious town when I myself wasn't religious, and I was also homeschooled. And while I am extremely grateful for my childhood, and it was really awesome in a lot of ways, sometimes it could be really isolating, and I didn't always feel like my voice was being heard. And spoken word poetry really helped me with that. The first time I heard spoken word poetry, I almost cried. I was at a Unitarian Universalist church service, and later one of my friends posted a video from this same poet. Her name is Andrea Gibson. She's fantastic. And after I watched that video, I started spiraling, binge watching all of these spoken word videos on YouTube. And for anyone who isn't familiar with what spoken word poetry is, basically it's just any form of poetry that is written with the intention of it being spoken out loud. So after I started binge watching all of these spoken word poetry videos, I didn't so much decide to start writing spoken word poetry as I started accidentally doing it. Does anyone here ever talk to themselves besides me? Yeah, okay, cool. So I would talk to myself, and when I would do this, it would start resembling something like spoken word poetry. And this was really, really therapeutic because I didn't have to worry about an audience at all. I had the liberty to say whatever I wanted to say and to express whatever it was that I wanted to express. There is a quote from a poet who's actually from the town where I was born, named Mae Swenson, and she was a critically acclaimed poet, and she was writing in the 20th century. And a line from one of her poems is, "Not able to be honest in person, I wish to be honest in poetry." And I think areas where we can be honest are really, really important. Mae Swenson was a lesbian from a really conservative Mormon family, so she didn't always feel comfortable expressing who she was around the people who she knew around her, but poetry was a safe context where she could do that. Another awesome way that spoken word poetry helps with processing is that the creative aspect of it can help unlock subconscious things that should be processed as well. When I write spoken word poetry, sometimes I will want to use a word, but I will have no memory of ever hearing that word or reading that word, nor could I really tell you what it means. But I'll look the word up and find out that I used it in the right context. And if I'm able to subconsciously access vocabulary that I have no memory of ever hearing, then I think the same is true of emotions. So, spoken word poetry can help you process emotions and events, things that you want to happen, things that you don't want to have happen, and it can also help you process what is going on in other people's lives as well. So, once upon a time, someone that I know went through a really interesting breakup. And after watching them go through this, I had so much angst on their behalf. And I was so mad at the other person. So instead of egging their house, or tofuing if you're vegan like me, hey, I decided to write this poem. You are perpetually perplexing me with your propensity for polarity. You are Persephone munching on pomegranate seeds, and then you are Hades. I'll like, hey, please, hail me, I'm the god of the underworld, but it's whatever. But darling, I know you better. I know your ego, I know you're less god and more show. I know you don't know if you exist unless you have an audience. Traveling the river Styx, wearing a t-shirt that says 666, listening to a metal mix, and discussing the importance of immortal politics. But you don't preside in a palace over a paradise of perished souls. In fact, I'm not even sure if you have a soul. I know you think you're on A-roll, but maybe you should make it a goal not to be so much of an a-hole. And I probably shouldn't compare you to the Hell King, because you're just emo enough that you probably find it flattering, but your sentences are so sugar-coated, I think that they are fattening. So I will count the calories in your love me please soliloquies that always set me so ill at ease and clog up all of my arteries. If deception were artistry, you'd be Da Vinci. But Da Vinci used to buy birds just to set them free, and there's more clipped wings in your aviary. You are a very charming kind of person, disarming. So your flock surround you even when they see the sharp glint of steel coming, even when they start to feel the sharp twinge of something. So yes, you are sharp. I am not arguing. But are you going to use your sharpness to cut away every thread just like the face? More so ever, the word Styx comes from the Greek word for hate, so no, I am not gonna get on that boat. There are better ways to float. I don't mean to gloat, but ever since your parting with me, my arteries have been blissfully cholesterol-free. You are Persephone, munching on pomegranate seeds, and then you are Hades. You are your own undoing. So that poem was really helpful for me to process a lot of that angst. And it still didn't make it okay what the other person had done, but it did help me feel more level-headed. And as I was writing it, I realized that it wasn't just about that particular person and that particular situation, but it was applicable to other people that I had to deal with in real life, and it helped me process those situations as well. Also, that poem is really, really playful, and for me, play is an integral part of my writing experience. Play is a really safe environment to process a lot of scary things or concepts or intense emotions. Last fall, I taught youth theater, and I would give these kids freedom to create characters, to develop storylines, and to work together. And it was really interesting watching these kids come up with these scenarios that would very quickly end in death, despair, and destruction. kids can be surprisingly dark. And I think these kids were processing a lot of the scary things that they saw happening around them, that they were hearing about, seeing in the safe environment of play, of theater. And the therapeutic benefits of play have been recognized for quite some time. Play therapy has been around since 1921, and although it was originally intended for children, it is now more and more being used with adults, and even just incorporating little playful things like coloring books into therapy sessions is becoming more and more common. So I think it's also beneficial for adults. Additionally, approaching something with a sense of play helps me be more honest. Because if I can approach something playfully or conversationally, then it's a much easier access point. Versus if I wanted to come out and say something super dark and intense right away, or try to write the deepest poem, or say the most astute thing. If I came from that place, then I probably wouldn't create anything ever. So for me, play is very important in that process. There is a High German word for play, which translates to lively rhythmical movement. And to me, a lot of those words are very correlated with spoken word poetry. And so I find having a playful mindset when going into writing poetry is really beneficial. Also, spoken word poetry is performative, and so you get to have a lot of fun with the way that you perform a piece as well, and you get to be really playful in that way. So this is a poem that I wrote that starts off fairly playfully, and then it takes a little bit of a turn, and when I initially started writing it, that was not my intention. I thought it was just going to be a cute little pick-me-up poem. So, trigger warning, there is a mention of self-harm, but it's not too detailed at all. On days where you feel fat, let me tell you that. You bloat beautifully. You're like a bioluminescent blowfish. Every marine biologist's 11/11 and birthday wish, blowing bubbles beneath blue waves, and on the days where you feel like you don't want to think any of the thoughts you've already thought before, we can open up an already thunk thought thrift store. And hipsters will sift for outdated, high-waisted thoughts and post them on their fashion blogs, and get lots of likes, comments, and retweets, and you are bright like a comet and so sweet. So on the days where you feel like your mind needs a shower, I will turn on the TV power and scour in search of shows to make you laugh. Because that's the brain's bubble bath, so lather in laughter. But if that's not what you're after, I will jump around and sing along to all of your favorite pop songs. Because we're not snobs, and we can appreciate the beauty of lyrical simplicity. Those hipsters would totally think it was an atrocity listening to anything in the top 40, and if you're still looking for something different from me, I will tell you a bedtime story, and I will tear through the chapters with the velocity of a velociraptor. You will be totally enraptured, captured, watch as our protagonist is captured, and still manages to live happily ever after. But don't compare somebody's final paragraph with your prologue, your preface, when you've just barely scratched the surface. So on days when your heart is feeling kind of heavy and worthless, let me tell you that. I want your heart to beat the bass line to every poem I write. I want to crawl inside the cocoon of your ribcage and listen to the start and stop of your caterpillar heart. But really, it's more like a silkworm, because I've been spinning spools of thread from the silk that your silkworm heart sheds, so that down the length of your arm I can embed my embroidery. So when you look down the length of your arm, you'll see your frayed veins sealed up with the poetry of stitchery, and I'll stitch forest trees, and I'll stitch birds' wings, and I'll seal up your seams with moonbeams, so even in the night you can be guided by some kind of light to get you through. Because I can still imagine you cocooned in crisp white hospital sheets. I can imagine the sound of your monitored heartbeat tracing jagged red lines across a hospital screen to match the scratches on your skin, and you are so soft. I hope you never have to touch another sharp thing ever again, unless you're holding a needle to thread, so you can stitch up the sky with thoughts from your mind, breath from your lungs, and words from your tongue, because you have the most beautiful voice. I hope when you look down the length of your arm, you see embroidered shorts. Thanks. So that poem starts off super playfully, and for me, that was a lot easier than immediately jumping into something that was really bothering me. I wrote that poem right after someone that I really cared about ended up in the hospital for self-harm. And again, writing this poem didn't make the situation okay, and it was still hell for that person, but it did help me feel calmer and to process a lot of those emotions. Another way that spoken word poetry really helps with processing is through providing you a community to process things with. Although when I initially started writing spoken word poetry, I didn't have any audience in mind, I did eventually see a poster for a local slam, and I decided to go, and I'm so glad that I did, because poetry slams are a really interesting environment because you are essentially sharing diary entries with people right away. And as a result of that, you are able to skip over a lot of small talk, and you are able to have conversations about things that you might not normally have conversations right away with people that you just met. And there's something really awesome about that. A lot of people use spoken word poetry to talk about things like racial discrimination and LGBTQ plus rights and feminism and sexual harassment. So they're not only allowing themselves the space to process, but they are allowing their community to process something that's going on in their community. And that's really cool. Before I mentioned watching YouTube videos of spoken word poetry, and there are a lot of poets who publish their work on YouTube and get hundreds of thousands of views. So they're using art, spoken word poetry, as an awesome tool for activism or to raise awareness, and they're creating a community with people on the internet across the nation or sometimes across country lines. And that's really cool. Also, getting up on stage and sharing your story is so empowering. I remember the first time I went to a slam, I was shaking like a leaf, but I somehow managed to write my name on the sign-up sheet, and they somehow managed to read my name, and I got up and I performed. And I remember distinctly the MC for that event, he did a poem, and when he read, his hands were shaking too. And I think there's something so powerful about someone being so scared to share something and then still getting up there and saying it. So spoken word poetry is really empowering. That way, it is admitting that you have something to say and then sharing it with people. And that's really awesome. So this is a poem that I did at one of my first slams about a couple of my friends. So my atheist friend just got himself a Christian girlfriend with whom he spends all of his weekends and then some. And he discusses his atheism. He tells her, I have a freckle on my skin for every time I've sinned, but it's not that hard to sin if we're going by the biblical definition. And if God is really that omniscient, he seems to be pretty inefficient, the father type that's distant. So why should I spend my Sundays at service in search of another father who won't say, I love you? And she says, okay, I'll pray for you. And hey, God is real and he is watching over you. Even if you don't believe it's true, even if you're not reading the messages that he's sending you, sometimes God's script is so elegant, it's hard to decipher, to translate, but it's written in the way your lungs contract and inflate, in the oxygen in your lungs, and the taste buds on the tip of your tongue, the roof at the top of your head, the smell of freshly baked bread, the coziness of a freshly laundered bed, the rainbow spectrum ranging from violet to red, and I can't pretend to know why he was alive and he was dead, but when I look around and see so much of his writing to read and so much that I have read, I cannot help my insistence at his existence when I look around and see his persistence and diligence in the upheap of the intricate plans that this is. So yeah, I know he exists. And he's like, okay, still an atheist. But even though I will not accept Jesus as God's son, I accept we, us, because you are the one, my savior. I don't give a shit what God thinks of my good or bad behavior, but I will encourage you to love thy neighbor, as long as you remember to love me, and I will bring you Bible scriptures alongside your tea. I like the idea of you looking out and seeing God's post-it notes as far as the eye can see, written for you especially. I know I am especially prone to cynicism, and the thinking that you have it all figured out is a form of narcissism, but even with my tendency, I promise to love you tenderly, as long as you let me, as long as you want me to. And she's like, well, thanks. I'll pray for you. Thanks. You guys are such troopers, clapping all the way through this. I really appreciate it. You guys are great. Okay, so thing about spoken word poetry is that once you are able to stand up in front of a crowd of people with your hands shaking, reading something that happened to you, something you've seen in the world, something that you're nervous about sharing, it becomes a lot easier to do so in real life. It becomes a lot easier to be honest with people in situations outside of a poetry slam or an open mic or a poetry reading. It's a lot easier to bring up issues that maybe you weren't comfortable bringing up before. Since writing poetry and sharing poetry, I find it a lot easier to be authentic with people and to share what's actually on my mind and to feel empowered in my real life and to find community in a lot of different places. So spoken word poetry has really been an awesome way for me to practice a lot of those skills. And even if you are not a spoken word poetry person, which is totally fine, I still think it's important to maintain those parts of your life that might feel superfluous or playful, but that really help you feel empowered and help you process things, because those skills are applicable to so many other things in life. Recently, a professional spoken word poet came to my school, Utah State University, and I was speaking with him, and it turns out he actually went to school here and was involved in a poetry group here, which I thought was really cool. And he talked about spoken word poetry and using it to write towards fear. And he talked about it being permission to feel and to express. And that comes back to admitting that you have something to say. And spoken word poetry was something that really unlocked that for me. So I have a couple more closing poems. And then after that, if anyone has any questions or if anyone has any experiences that this talk reminded them of, then we can have a discussion afterwards. So this is a poem that I wrote after I went to an aquarium and I watched an octopus. And I think that another thing with art or with poetry that a lot of people feel is that, oh, I don't have any interesting experiences, or my life is really, really boring. But I feel like as long as you can find a way to communicate some sort of emotion, I feel like it's fine. As long as you've had some sort of emotion, I think that you can make compelling art that will connect with other people. And another part of the slam experience isn't just sharing your own opinions and stories and thoughts, but listening to the stories and opinions of people around you and feeling like, oh, I didn't know someone else thought that way, or I didn't know someone else had that experience. All of a sudden you have permission to talk about that and to connect over that. And even if their experience isn't directly relatable, or you haven't gone through a similar thing or felt a similar way, all of a sudden your perspective is broadened and you can empathize with them or a certain circumstance that you might not have been able to empathize with before. So I think there's things in everyone's lives that are very valid things to write about. As long as you've had an emotion, I think you can make a compelling piece of art. So this is a poem that I wrote just after I went to the aquarium, and that inspired me. This is a poem about the octopus. This is a poem about the octopus because the octopus is better than the rest of us. And if an octopus could talk to us, it'd be kind of scary because an octopus is not that innocuous, but I think it would have some pretty interesting things to say. It could tell us what it's like to dance without the hindrance of vertebrae. And if you got the nerve to say, an octopus is an animal, so wouldn't have anything that intelligent to say anyway, joke's on you. The octopus has 9 brains. And that is in fact a fact. So if you'd like to retract your statement to leave your image intact, I will allow that. And another reason why the octopus is better than the rest of us is that an octopus is incapable of prejudice. I mean, it has 3 hearts and is colorblind. So if we start to be more like the octopus, I think you'll find that we could really be more. And with our extra photoreceptors, we could really see more. And we could really come together to bring it on the seafloor, learn what it's like to sway without the hindrance of vertebrae or prejudice. And if justice was ever compromised, we could combat that by becoming the best of secret agent good guy spies, change our colors to hide from search and eyes. If things got real urgent, we could call them those urchin guys. Or maybe a battalion of seahorse stallions, yeah. An octopus is armed against hate with arms that add up to 8. And yep, that was a shark it just ate, because it's not afraid of the dark or anything else, mate. No. Why would it be? I mean, an octopus has 9 brains, 3 hearts, 8 arms, and 0 self-doubt or fear. And if it came here, if the octopus could talk to us, I think it'd really be a shock to us when it said, yo, humans, listen to my lesson. Y'all are always overstressing and second guessing. I mean, I've got 9 brains and I overthink things less. And I've got 3 hearts and I never sink or get depressed. You guys have got to stop worrying about what other people are thinking or what other people are doing, because that will be your undoing. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't fight for what you know is right, but you ain't gotta fight every fight. So anyway, I'm gonna go snack on a shark. And with that, the octopus slithers back into the dark. Thank you. So, this is one last poem. And this was a poem that I wrote after somebody expressed they didn't like me. And it was a really fun way to get over that. In response to your rejection, I know, I have got spots splattered across my face. I look like a Jackson Pollock, but dang son, I can really pop and lock. Ask me if I want to hang, but you probably rather not, because my thoughts are like ziggurats, unevenly stacked atop one another like an ancient structure of Mesopotamia. A little bit of mess, a little bit of mania, a little bit of everyday life hysteria, but dang, if I gotta, I can be strong as a terracotta warrior risen from the ground writing lines about myself because I like the sound, and I'm not gonna get them from anyone else around. The only lines I get are sunburn lines from sunny places I've been, and lines from plays that I'm in, the variety Shakespearean, because the heart beats an iambic pentameter, but when I am nervous, I can be a bit of a stammerer, and my heart should be a carpenter because it's such a good hammerer. Like, just give it some tools, and it would be building oodles of schools for underprivileged youth. If my heart were a carpenter, he would build cozy libraries with secret passageways, and you could grab a book and read a passage while you were on your way to a cafe where they served the very best soy milk lattes. All this to say, underneath the width of my skin, I have planets orbiting in rotation, so many worlds within me, you'd have to write them in scientific notation, and sometimes I get a little bit self-conscious of my Valley Girl style of oration, but like, that does not stop me from the vocalization of my vocation, because within my words I find vacation, and if you're looking for a further form of identification, I'm proud to say I did eventually get my license registration. For a long time, the only license I had was the poetic kind. I guess I was never very good at obeying stop signs. Anyway, to retrace, to refine, to respond to your rejection, yeah, I'm gonna be just fine. Thank you guys. So now I'd like it to open it up for a discussion. If you have any thoughts about this talk, a time that art has helped you process something, anything that's made you guys, go for it.
First, you have wonderful skill with alliteration. Very good. So I want to compliment you there. When you create your art, is it more free verse, or is it free thought, or are you sketching it out and then refining, or how do you come about with your poems?
So I normally will start off a poem by saying something that I would normally say. So for my one about my atheist friend who had a Christian girlfriend, I'd say, so my atheist friend, just, he got a Christian girlfriend. And for me, that's a really easy access point, and I think this connects back to playfulness for me, because if I started off, personally for me, if I started off a poem with an outline and I was rigid in applying to that, I don't think I would ever be able to process anything that was happening subconsciously. I don't think that I would be able to arrive at something that felt organic. So I try to be really open about where a poem is heading and to allow for the unexpected within that. But yeah, it's all out loud. And I think that's another reason why it's really freeing for me, is because I don't have to worry about grammatical conventions, and I don't have to worry about going back and changing a line. It's done. It's gone the second that I want it to be. yeah, does that answer your question? Cool.
So you mentioned you were vegan. I'm vegetarian, and just was wondering. Well, I noticed being vegetarian and vegan can be very polarizing as well. Just like talking to a religious person as being atheist, like it's people have very strong opinions about this. So I'm wondering if you've experienced that, and if you've also written like poetry to kind of express those feelings.
I think the closest that I've come to writing like a vegan poem probably is my Octopus poem, but I think that's a good idea. Maybe you've given me inspiration now. Yes, I was actually talking about this with some other speakers the other day. How people be like, "Oh, that's so unhealthy," and meanwhile they'll be like chowing down on their Big Mac or whatever. So it seems like sometimes it's not whether it's healthy or not. It really is. Is this inconvenient for me, or does this challenge something that I'm doing? I think a lot of times people think that when I say that I'm vegan, that I'm going to attack them, so they immediately have this like huge wall of defense. So yeah, I would say that I have experienced that. Mostly I get, "Oh, I can never give up bacon." I think that's the main response that I get. And some people think it's cool, but I mean, it's like with anything. You're gonna get a variety of responses, but polarized for sure. Yeah.
Thank you again. It's always wonderful to hear you perform. I wonder if you've ever done any freestyle performance, and would that work for you, or do you feel inclined to that at all?
The amount that I feel inclined to that is 0%. I think part of the reason why I have gotten really involved with theater and spoken word poetry is that I already know what I'm going to say. And I think that there's something really comforting about that. And free verse throws that out of the window. And so I much prefer to have some idea of what I'm going to say. And so I enjoy the process of writing and coming up with things that are unexpected, or being like, "Oh, this is fun," and then erasing lines and just going with it. But that's for me, and that's not something that I really want to present to an audience. I would much rather give the audience something that I had put thought into and that already had a shape. Also, I'm just way too big of a baby for that. I'm too scared. That's terrifying for me. Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
So, you were saying that you come up with most of your poems organically, correct? Have you ever tried experimenting with pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone there to like try to create something that maybe feels different than from what you're normally used to?
Yeah. So the one that I started us off with, the one about strangers, that was one where I did kind of know what I wanted to say. I wanted to talk about how sometimes talking to strangers is a lot easier for me because I feel like the stakes are lowered, right? Versus like talking to someone you already know, I start to worry that, oh, maybe they won't like me and I'll lose this relationship. And so sometimes I feel less free to be myself, or I start putting these restrictions on myself. So I did start out with that. But as I was writing, it helped me realize how much I myself like being a stranger and how much I enjoy kind of putting on a persona to some extent. And that isn't always maintainable with people that you know. So yes and no. I started out with an idea and I knew that I wanted to say that thing, but as I was writing, I was like, oh, I also want to include this. So I don't think I'm ever going to be like, sit down, have an outline. This is exactly where I start. This is exactly like the middle, the crux, and this is like my conclusion. Because I get too distracted. And it's too much fun to explore other stuff, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What's up?
Hey.
Hey, how often do your identities, like, you identify as a vegan, like your secular beliefs, how often does that come into play with your communities within, like, poetry and play?
That's interesting. Like, what's the overlap?
Yeah, like, you want me to give you, like, an example, possibly?
Yeah, sure.
So like when I like try to do poetry or like when I go to like poetry slams, it's kind of interesting because I'm coming there as an agnostic atheist, and it's kind of interesting like interacting with other people who like often have like Christian beliefs, and when we come and discuss poetry and express ourselves, we express ourselves in different ways, and it's very interesting because like there's a sense of disconnect and a sense of like division, and sometimes it's hard to empathize or like understand one another because we come from two different beliefs or like have two different beliefs or whatever.
Great. I don't get too much up on a soapbox about veganism at poetry slams. It's just not something that I've done. Maybe until next time, though. Thanks for the inspiration. But with my poem about the Christian and the atheist, it was interesting. I had Christians come to me afterwards and be like, "Oh, you got that." And I think it did open a door for discussion. So I haven't been met with a lot of polarity about that. No one's ever been like, "Oh, that thing you said really offended me." I've actually been approached saying, "Oh, like I felt like you understood my perspective," and I've been able to have conversations based on those interactions. So at this point, it hasn't been too big of an issue. But if people disagree, they'll disagree, and you can try to have a conversation and see if they're open to it. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You were saying that just to be creative and just kind of go off the cuff is great, but wondering if you've also studied it too. Is that important, like to understand the different kind of, I don't even know what the words are, iambic pentameter and all those. Have you done that also, and is that important to good presentation? And
I think this is really up to somebody's individual process. I think that some people really do enjoy having an outline and knowing exactly what they want to say, and that's fine. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. For me, the structure isn't super important, but a lot of people really do like writing in verse. iambic pentameter. I did a lot of Shakespeare, and I really like reading and listening to other poets. And I think that more so than staying super true to one form or to outlining, exposing yourself to other artists in whatever it is that you want to do, whether that's, drawing or music or playing ping pong, whatever your form of expression is, I think that is really useful, and it helps build your skills and help you understand how the craft can be done and the possibilities that the craft has. Yeah, does that answer your question? Anything else?
Okay. It sounds like when you're creating, you're starting with a idea, an observation, and then a conversation with yourself, kind of a conversation. Is it kind of how you jump into this? You kind of get into it that way, and then you kind of, express yourself with your thoughts, and then you kind of put it together. Is that kind of right?
I think so, yeah. And sometimes it's a conversation with myself, and sometimes, like the one that I wrote, that mentions Persephone and Hades, that is very much addressed to another person. And so spoken word poetry can also be therapeutic in that way. It's kind of like writing an angry letter and then never sending it, right? Which is, that stereotypical.
Yeah, the email, yeah. Don't press send before you, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
Yeah, I got you.
So sometimes, sometimes
Got
to
it.
other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, let's give another round of applause for
Thanks,
Sophia.
guys.